This time in the Magick Kitchen, we are joined by author Coby Michael.
I'm Leandra Witchwood.
And I'm Elise Wells.
And welcome to the Magick Kitchen Podcast, where we talk about magic, kitchen witchcraft, herbs,
and everything in between.
The Magick Kitchen Podcast is funded and supported by thewitchwoodteahouse.com, offering a variety of hand-blended loose leaf teas as well as loose herbs for all of your ritual, spell work, wellness, and everyday enjoyment needs. If you would like to support this podcast while sipping a great cup of tea, head over to thewitchwoodteahouse.com and find the magic that's in store for you.
Coby is an occult herbalist and magical practitioner who teaches about the ritual use of poisonous and psychoactive plants. The author of the Poison Path Herbal and co-author of Leo Witch, he owns and operates the Poisoner's Apothecary, an online shop and educational resource for the Poison Path. He has been blogging since 2016 and has written articles for Alraun, the Poisoner's Guild, This Witch Magazine, and The Witch's Almanac. He lives in St. Petersburg, Florida. And today we are going to be diving into your newest book, The Poison Path Grimoire, which, honestly, it is not even the tiniest exaggeration. This is one of the most advanced books I've read in a long time.
Yeah.
It was so refreshing.
Much appreciated.
It was so good. Anyone listening who's if I have to read what the Wheel of the Year is one more goddamn time, this book is for you. You will not have to endure that. You can just dive deep. Anyone who's I know everything there is to know about Poison Path plants.
No.
You need this book because I guarantee there's at least one thing that's going to get you.
Right.
Yeah. Just excited for something new. It's so inspiring. It's such a good book. Sorry, I could really rave. It was.
Yeah. I'm raving too, because I was reading this and I know a lot about the Poison Path. I know a lot about herbalism. I've been studying it for 20 something years. And I was like, oh, I've never heard of that. I got to go research that a little bit more. And, it's these kinds of books that I look forward to, the ones that really take me from what I thought I knew to, oh, crap, I need to know more about this. And that's what I love about this. And then you go really in detail of creating those relationships with the path that I think get overlooked in some books. It's kind of skirted over, oh yeah, you just blow cinnamon out of your hand. I know I keep harping on that one, my listeners, but I hate that practice, just blowing cinnamon out your door. I feel like it's so trivial and it doesn't really connect you with the spirit, the animism of the practice. And I think your book really taps into that, getting to know the plant before you start really working with it. So welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad to have you here. I've actually met you in person. We met at Temple Fest and I took one of your workshops there. That was astonishing and I loved it. And I had to have you on the podcast. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
The first thing I actually want to start with is why the Poison Path, because I thought you did a really good job of sort of getting into that, because I'm not an herbalist. My connection to plants is through land. So if it's not growing around me, and often I don't know the name of the plant, I will have to spend time, because I live most of the year in Greece. I'm currently, as of recording this, we're recording it early in 2025. I am in the US. And so and then I lived in the Middle East as a kid. So there's just been a lot of biomes that I've spent time in. And so I truly don't feel like I know individual plants the way I would like to. But those are the ones I tend to know, is if it's around me and I Google it in that moment and I feel really secure with my plant app, that's my plant knowledge. So I went into this book as somebody who was let's see how this would serve that path of more shamanistic land connection. And my notes are ridiculous because at first I wasn't sure if it was for me at all. But what you said in the beginning got me very hooked. You explained that poison plants are specifically helpful for processing shadow work and releasing shame and fear and alchemizing those things. And you said something that really resonated with me. The shame and fear we are told to feel in response to our darker sides is the real shadow. And that was that for me. Like, I was like, oh, that's exactly. And I think that's why this path calls to certain people, is they're like self-work and this whole idea, and like the spiritual movement at large of like self-improvement and like that need to always be better and all that. It actually can really just be an echo chamber of shame and fear again and again. And poison plants actually get us to truly alchemize that and recognize that we're kind of like spinning our wheels down here when like the waterfall's actually rushing from up there. And poison plants are like, we're going to go up to that waterfall.
Very cool. I'm glad that stuck out, because that kind of became a pretty big theme of this book, was the shadow work and kind of understanding poison as an energetic force, sort of a concept, an alchemical concept of something that influences us and flows through us, and is a means of expressing all sorts of different qualities. We talk about like toxic relationships, toxic people, poisons that we put in our body that negatively affect us in different ways. And all of these different metaphors for sort of what this concept of poison is. So incorporating that into shadow work became a really big theme of this second book. So yeah, for me, it was just kind of a realization that it is the shame and the fear that really cause the negative effects of what we consider the shadow. And I think that embodying those aspects more fully and really being able to sit with them and embrace them, and, in some cases going to that opposite end of the spectrum and connecting with that darker side of ourselves, that we're able to get a better sense and understanding for what it is and where it comes from. And then we kind of have the realization of that being not necessarily what defines us as people, maybe as a small part of ourselves, but we're able to kind of separate it a little bit more and allow the shadow to sort of sit across from us and have a conversation where we're both able to sort of express ourselves and come to a deeper understanding. And I think that's really where like the goal of shadow work, or the integration or embracing the shadow kind of comes from. And that's where the healing comes from.
Yeah, I've said that many, many times. It's like you need to be able to sit across the table and have a cup of tea with your shadow, so that you can integrate its lessons and see what superpower you developed through that shadow.
Yeah.
Maybe your shadow was being quiet and being observant. So now you're able to observe people a little more detailed, and what their intentions are before they express the intention, type thing. Those little nuances you can pick up on. And I love the aspect of shadow work that you work with, because it's so real. It's not fluff. It's not something that, oh, we're going to do this journal prompt and we're all healed. No, we're going to dig in deep. We're going to get comfortable with it. But to get through that, you have to be uncomfortable. You have to go through that metamorphosis. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely lots of different layers to shadow work. And I think it's an ongoing, continuous work. Never goes away. So it's always part of us and part of our learning and healing journey. And I think in a lot of cases, the shadow is, it's a spiritual ally. It's where we can experience the most growth. And in a lot of cases, the shadow is kind of a protector that emerges as an aspect of ourself in response to trauma, or in response to somebody telling us that something about ourselves is not good or not acceptable. And then we kind of let this little shadow persona out that then acts as a buffer to kind of protect what's the most precious to us inside. So I think partnering with the shadow and working with it in different ways that are empowering is really, really important.
Yes.
And something you said about the poison path and shadow work kind of conjunctively. Is that the way to say that? Conjunctively?
Sounds right.
Sounds right. Sounds weird, but it sounds right.
I know. Conjunction, junction, what? Okay, unrelated, but that's what my brain said was the correct answer. Anyway, something you said about both was and this is your quote from page 19. Because like I said, I have so many notes on this book. Like it was really, it meant so much to me to read this book. You said, you are the one who is in control, even when you choose to surrender. And that is says so much. Like I want to put it on a poster next to my hang in there baby. Like it's so powerful to remember, and people forget it so often. Like I recently ran a course on the dark goddesses called the Red Thread, and I kind of just delved into like the 10 years of Inanna priestessing I've been doing and the connections over the years of traveling to different sacred sites between different goddesses, which put a pin in that because I do want to ask you about Venus, the Witch Queen, as well, in relation to that work I do. But people will say to me like, "Oh, I'm being called by a dark goddess and I'm terrified because I don't want to do the shadow work." And I'm like, "What are you afraid of?" And they're like, getting out of control, or like instantly we start using like these more, I hate gendering things, but like the more masculine, like the logic, the rational, like they're afraid that like they'll lose control. You know, even the word control is like kind of a word we have to relinquish on the spiritual path. Like we never have control. Like Leandra and I were just talking the other day about how, actually, I might have even been talking about your book, how I could have never timed for my life, like this interview, reading this book, showing up today. Like for listeners, we're recording this the day I arrived from my 3-day descent trip that I did in early January, that I talked about back then. But it's amazing how the path, when we surrender to it, will take us where we're supposed to go. And we do have to relinquish that control. And it is so terrifying. But actually, we are the one who's in control because we said yes to the surrender. So it's just a constant, like you said, it's never over. We're always spiraling back, and we're, coming back around to lessons, but we are in control of every experience because we've stepped that foot onto the path.
And you put in the almost the next page, you talk about inviting the fates into your workings, into your circle, into your path, and how many practitioners find that dangerous. And I agreed with you when you said, like, no, they're already there. They've always been there. The fates they're part of the path. I was like, yes. Like they're the catalyst for chaos is our catalyst for change. We can't change when we are complacent or we're comfortable. There has to be that washing machine effect, that agitation. So I love that you put that in there.
Yeah, I think that, healing is an important thing. And I think that there's a time and a place for that. And, part of this healing process and where we're at collectively and individually is, there's a time to heal and a time to fight. And sometimes, looking at it as surrendering and letting go of control should be a very like empowering and exhilarating thing. Like, let the monster out, give it a chance to, fully wreak havoc and chaos, and just let that really intense primal energy kind of flow out of you and flow through you. And, knowing that you can always come back to center, just like, when we go on a journey in meditation or, different visualizations, like you are always able to find a way back. Like nobody is losing their connection to their physical body and just like wandering around out in the ethers in like a catatonic state for forever. So we always have that ability to kind of come back to center. So I think that it's important to kind of embody and exist in both of those extremes. And it's not until you're comfortable with doing that you're able to, get a sense for all of the variation that exists in between those.
And you go on to talk about like the Nightshade family and how their themes are of sex, death, and power. And later in that paragraph, you talk about how they are feminine, and also their magic is subtle, sneaky, and sometimes sinister, but not in a malicious sense. I loved that. That was so perfect. It was so eloquent because that's true. They are sneaky. They don't always give you the full spectrum, or the full perspective. And I think it's more of in a way of letting you take the journey so that you can go have that aha moment, like, oh, it's been there the whole time type thing.
Yeah, they're definitely, sneaky in a sense of, there's certain things about them that are seductive and attractive and that kind of draw you in. And that was what initially piqued my interest in these plants, was their association to witchcraft and their different uses in spell work and all of the occult side of it. And it was like, that was kind of like the carrot at the end of the rope, that where they're like, this is how we're going to get this guy's attention. And then further down the road, then you realize like all of these different healing processes and shedding of old versions of yourself, and all of the work that they had in store, when they initially enticed you in under one kind of pretense and then show up as these totally different kind of entities that have much more in store.
Yeah, that was certainly my experience with belladonna, going through a belladonna ceremony. I thought, oh, okay, it'll just be like a cool experience. I'll see what happens. But it was my experience with her when I was finally confronted with her true essence. She was terrifying, but so exhilarating and so beautiful. And it was just this moment of the calling was there. And it was finally like all the veils were pulled off of my eyes and I could see it all. But it's like that blip, that moment where you're like, I get it. And then once you're out of that state, you're like, oh, wait, what did I get? What was that?
The sacred wild can't be explained, only experienced. Sacred Wild Priestess is a 12-week online initiation into land ritual, sacred sound, and soul remembering. Hear it from past students.
We got to go do these beautiful rituals that, open your heart into the space and allow you to feel the depth of the land that you really can't do on your own.
This was really about finding in-person community.
And my breakthroughs came from the sisterhood.
I felt like my voice could finally come out.
It is more than a course. It's a return. Join us at seekingnumina.com/sacredwildpriestess or tap the link in the show notes. Early bird ends June 10th.
So I wanted to ask you to tell our listeners, this was like mind-blowing for me to learn about. Tell us what entheogen really means. Because actually, before you say that, people are thinking poison and they're like, okay, these plants are dangerous. But like people are ingesting poison consistently in this country, in the United States. Like there's over 300. Well, pharmaceuticals aside, there are over pharmaceuticals for sure, but there are over 300 food grade, quote unquote, chemicals in the US that are not food grade anywhere else in the world. And they're just naturally in our food. And I've been in the US now for a while, like through the holidays, and like my nails will not grow. I've never had that problem since living in Greece. My hair stopped growing and I've been taking twice as much biotin as usual. Like there is like no nutrients in anything here. And all that to say, people take poisons all the time. And I want people to realize that like a lot of these plants aren't really that scary when we consider like alcohol, like alcohol is horrible for our body. So just as we talk about these poison plants and like the psychoactive effects and hallucinations and like all the things that people might like be really timid about, like have an open mind, because nothing is as bad for us as half the things we can buy in the grocery store. No, okay, that's not true. Some of these plants can be quite dangerous if you're not responsible, but with responsible approaches, I think these plants are quite approachable. So yes, tell our listeners what entheogens actually are, because this was like,
well, yeah, on the word poison too, it's such a broad umbrella term for plants, substances, things that we come into contact with that have like a really, really broad spectrum of different effects. So poison doesn't always ultimately mean death or, grievous bodily harm. The very same substances or chemical compounds that make a plant, quote, poisonous are also where it derives its medicinal properties from. So there's all different ways that a plant could be considered poisonous. And there's been a, 2,000-year-long conversation when we look at kind of the earliest concepts of that in Greece with the pharmakon, in Latin with venenum, and then like early modern medicine kind of evolving in this conversation about like what poison actually was. Was it this quantifiable thing that had, the same effect on every single organism that it had contact with? Was it this quantifiable thing that existed in all of these different plants and animals that was just like a specific substance? And then we realized that it's all of these other various different chemical actions, so one poisonous plant might give you a really upset stomach, or I'm not going to talk about that. That's too gross to talk about. A really upset stomach, or another one might just like completely shut down your nervous system, stop your heart. So it's a very wide kind of broad spectrum of effects. But when it comes to the term entheogen, that was a term that was developed in the 1970s by a group of ethnobotanists, anthropologists that were studying the world's plant medicines. So a variety of different, psychoactive plants with ceremonial use around the world. So they came up with this term entheogen to differentiate from the word psychedelic, which at the time had a lot of baggage associated with like the counterculture and hippies and things like that. So they wanted a more, I guess, like academically appropriate term. So they took two words from Greek, ancient Greek, which you'll probably know like way more about these words than I do. And I've never actually heard them pronounced out loud. So I don't know if I'll say them right, but we've got entheos, which has the same root of the word for deity or divine. So theos is to be inspired, possessed, connected to a deity, connected to the divine. And then the second word where we get the gen is genesthai, Gen.
Not bad. Yeah, Greek. So, and this is a random. No, finish your thing. Sorry, I'll tell you a random thing about Greek pronunciation that is so infuriating.
Basically, it just means to become filled with the divine, to create the divine within, to generate the divine within. But I even look at it as, not so much like invoking a deity or a spirit, but also manifesting that already existing connection to the divine that we have within ourselves. So with it being entheogen, inward, it implies that sort of consumption of something that facilitates that connection or wakes it up.
Yeah. So entheos is correct. Like that, it's all, everything you said is true. It's also interesting because I think this was in your book. It might have been a different book I was reading concurrently. Because I also was reading When the Drummers Were Women by Lane Redmond, and I was rereading Inanna, Lady of Largest Heart, and I was reading Spiral Dance while I was reading your book. So I was like just jumping between all of them. And something else I was thinking about with entheogen is enthusiasm, enthusiasmos, which is like the ancient Greek word for it, is the same thing. Was that in your book about enthusiasm?
I don't know if it was in this last one. It's definitely, it's in the one that I'm working on because I was literally just like rewriting it.
Oh my gosh.
in the conclusion. So yeah, it has to do with like, think of it as like poetic inspiration. So it doesn't always have to be like connecting to a specific deity, but just like that ecstasy, that intoxication,
Yes.
that like shamanic sort of intensity of connecting.
And it's like eudaimonia, which is the same thing. It's that you've been, daemon is like spirit. So you've been like eudaimonia, like you've been imbued with the spirit. Because people like forget this, but like every animism today is kind of a smaller version of what animism was for our ancestors. It was so everything back then. Like if they got an idea for a new book, the idea was sentient. They understood it to be its own spirit. Like there was just an emblematic understanding of spirit. And that's how they understood genius as well, was like an external spirit. So it was not like we're just rediscovering, we're remembering what our ancestors always knew about plants, which is that they are a spirit that we're calling on to work with us when we engage in any ritual with plants. And I think that's such a beautiful, it's crazy. Like I'm reading the word in English and I was like, I didn't see it. But yeah, entheos, like bringing the gods into you, the divine within. And then the other cool thing about the root word of like gen, anything that starts with rama is actually a Y when it's the first, only when it's the first letter or when it's two of them in a row. So like, I'm trying to think of a word that has two in a row. Like engisi is the word for guarantee, and it's spelled like E gamma gamma. So it's an eng sound. But anyway, we're not here to learn how to pronounce Greek. But that word, generate, is the same word for generation, which is the same word in Greek as ancestor. So it literally, to me, this word is saying like, generate the divine within as your ancestors did. Like it's got so much in those root words.
Yeah, the etymology of words is just like a really fascinating topic, and linguistics in general. And I think that's how we can really draw a lot of this sort of ancient understanding that, you know, comes from oral traditions, or maybe it's just something that wasn't written down or, you know, was lost through like picking apart these different word meanings and place names. And it can tell us a lot about like what the people actually believed about those associated things through looking at the word's etymology. And that's something I like to, I guess, kind of reiterate when people ask, you know, different ways to connect to the plants of the poison path or to plants in general, because we can sometimes like dehumanize them and they just become, you know, ingredients, or, you know, mix A plus B to get C. So they're sort of reduced to their cause and effect. But yeah. Poisonous plants in particular have such a big personality and all of these characteristics and these dramatic stories that make it a lot easier for us to like anthropomorphize them. So I kind of equate it to, you know, working with any other spirit or deity. You know, how do you connect with the goddess Hecate? You know, you don't necessarily or never, you know, have like a physical piece of her that you are working with in that way to connect to and call upon her. You know, we've got images, stories, invocations, all of these things that connect us mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to the concept and the construct that is Hecate, that allow us to bring that spiritual essence into our presence. And I think that we can work with plants in very much the same way once we start to think about them again as like their own spiritual consciousness.
Yes. I love that, because I think it's what's missing in most herbal practices right now. A lot of people just want to know what the active ingredient is. And the idea that we just use XYZ and we get results, where and I stress this constantly, like we have to develop that relationship. We have to develop that understanding. And I mean, you tell tell, you get into the herbs, you get detailed into some of the plants like blackberry. And when I was reading, the vampiric herbs and the idea that, that there are taboos associated with these plants, like maybe that's why we gravitate towards the idea of just superficially connecting with them and using them in the commodified way. And in thinking of that, it reminds me of like how I've interacted with blackberry and how integral it is now to my path. It grows at every doorway in my house, and it did that naturally. I didn't ask it to. I mean, I did in a way, but my relationship with it shows up where it needs to. And you were talking about like how it grabs energy, how it pulls energy. And absolutely, I've watched it do this. Anybody who shows up at my door with energy that I don't want in my home, I will see that bush, grab them and hold on to them. And it's done it to me too. When I'm in an awkward state, or I'm in a state that's not conducive to whatever I'm supposed to be doing, I'm not even touching that bush, and somehow it grabs me. It'll scratch me, or it'll grab my sweater or my clothes. And then I know, okay, stop. It's talking to me now. And I think that's the relationship we start building, is when we start understanding these plants and their function, what they do for us on a spiritual level, on a medicinal level, on an energetic level.
And just with looking at the word entheogen, it implies that divine and spiritual connection. So I know that the term was in specific reference to plants that we would consider psychoactive or psychedelic or hallucinogenic. And I think it's like a tightrope that we kind of walk, because on the one hand, the chemistry and the active constituents, it's very, very fascinating. And it's also very important, when it comes to working with poisonous plants and knowing what they are capable of, how they should be applied safely, different modalities of using them, what the dosages are, so that's a really important part of getting this more intimate understanding on how to work with them safely. But then on the other side of that, like, we have to remember, as magical practitioners, spiritual practitioners, that they have this chemical potency, but they also have this spiritual potency. And so working with something entheogenically doesn't always have to mean that we are ingesting it, or that we are, having these hallucinogenic experiences. And I think that sometimes people get sort of caught up on looking at that side of it, versus sitting with the living plant, or working with the flower essence, or incorporating it into spell work in any of the myriad of other ways that we incorporate plants into spell work. And it's almost like, because they have this chemical potency, that people become so fixated on that they forget all of the other techniques that we have for connecting and working with plant spirits.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in that sense, we also forget that there's plants that we work with every single day that have that toxic capability, like nutmeg. Take too much nutmeg, you're going to have some trouble. Cinnamon, it's incredibly common. We have it in just about every baked good out there. But what happens when you take a tablespoon of cinnamon? Suddenly it becomes this fight or flight system that erupts in the body, because that's not what you're supposed to be doing with it. But even ginger, it's considered a heal-all, but take too much ginger, what happens? You're on fire. And like another personality within that plant erupts, another personality, another version of that plant becomes evident to us. And I think that's why it's so important to really get to know your plants and work with them, not just use them.
Yeah, absolutely. Even, something that we use really commonly in herbal medicine, like elderberry, fresh elderberry is poisonous. If we burn the wood, it releases toxins that can be poisonous. And so that's where, like, a lot of these taboos come from too in folklore, and like, don't bring elder wood into the house. Don't burn it or you're going to upset the spirit. Well, there's a chemical component that supports that too. So that's always really interesting to find when there's that correlation between different superstitions and taboos connected to how to interact with the plant. And then we find out that, well, there's also these chemical reasons for it too.
Our ancestors knew. They were dumb. If you're a serious practitioner teetering on the cusp of progress, it's time to step into true spiritual mastery. This is your invitation to join the Gardens of the Mystic Initiation and Certification Program, where I offer practitioners like you advanced teachings and guided experiences. Sign up now at leandrawitchwood.com or find the link in the show notes to learn more. Embrace your higher calling. Your journey awaits.
Speaking of things that are, we can look at folklore to see direct correlation to, perhaps scientific fact. One of the folklore pieces that you brought in that I really enjoyed was the Devil's Garden and the Devil's Acre. If you can tell our listeners a bit about that, because it's an ancient practice in Greece that they still do in the villages. The Devil's Acre concept, not quite the same, but similar.
My whole yard's a devil acre.
Very cool. I didn't know that there was an ancient Greek root to that. That's really awesome. So the idea and concept of that, and I think where it was introduced, at least to me, was through, I think it was Gemma Gary's work, the Devil's Dozen, where I think that the idea was introduced, but it was essentially this acre or parcel of land that farmers would take out of their fields or what they were using to plant their crops, and it would kind of be set aside and left wild, sort of an offering to the devil, being the folkloric devil or the spirits of the land, to appease them. So kind of saying like, I'm going to set aside this little area for you over here in hopes that, my crops do well and I'm not having like blight or, other issues with drought and things like that. So it's kind of a liminal offertory space. But then I kind of take that to be, a place where we as green witches and plant practitioners can also connect with that sort of adversarial spirit that exists in nature, that is sort of the wild and primal side.
So in ancient Greece, this wild and primal side, I always identify as Pan. Like there's a million horned gods. Highly recommend Horned God of the Witches by Jason Mankey. For anyone who's like, horned gods, Pan. Definitely, that's a great book. I also just started Magic at the Crossroads by Kate Freuler, and that is pretty good too. I'm only one chapter in so far. Definitely more devil-based than like Pan-based. Anyway, all that to say, in ancient Greece, my family actually come from Arcadia, which was where Pan was traditionally worshipped. And in the village that my family's from, unfortunately, it's like not really possible to live there today unless you are just an old farmer, because there's no internet. The electric's hit or miss. It runs out of water every July and August. So you have to have your own reservoirs. Like it's a lot of things that make it kind of prohibitive to live there, which is a shame. But the very, very elderly who still live there actually still do a practice of offering to what they call the stichia, which the best translation of that word is like elementals. And they fear them, like they see them kind of as Pan, but today they would never, they're Greek Orthodox, so they're not going to call it an ancient deity, but it's definitely the same practice, the same idea of like warding away bad energy by giving the first fruits to the stichia, traditionally at the spring, like at the water source for the town. So it would kind of serve two purposes. Like it would keep the stichia away from affecting your crops negatively. It also would say to the spring goddess, keep creating water because we need you. And then they have a devil's acre practice that's almost in reverse, which is if you don't clear your land before, depending who you ask, like they might say summer solstice. Nowadays, unfortunately, you really want to be doing that around Beltane because of climate change. But if you don't clear your land, you're inviting wildfire to eat your house, is the belief. And unfortunately, that's just true because brush burns fastest. So it's kind of like a reverse devil's acre that, like, if you let your land run rampant, it will invite the quote unquote devil to your space. Do you have any questions? I have a few more, but I feel bad.
Go run with it. We'll just keep conversing. I'm looking at all my marks and stuff. And like all of it's like, I'm looking at the devil's acre and stuff like that. Yeah. Like my whole yard is the devil's acre. I just let it run wild. I let it do what it's going to do. And I have the greatest things like grow there, like things I never planted grow there. And it's great. So I'm all for this devil's acre thing. I was doing it before I knew what it was.
Yeah, I feel like in a lot of ways too, it can kind of act as sort of a crossroads. Mm-hmm. So a place to do spell work, to connect to different spirits that, you don't have to find a crossroads or go to the middle of an intersection, but you've got sort of this uncultivated liminal space right in your garden or your backyard.
Yeah. Yeah, literally in my yard. So I have it landscaped so that I have pathways that are mowed. So one of them is literally a crossroad. And on one side is like my wormwood grows, and the other side it's just vegetables and stuff like that. And then one side it's all my motherwort. And then on another side it's just, I haven't planted anything. It's just wild. And that's my favorite place to sit, is like in that crossroad right there.
I wanted to pick your brain because you said in the book that you've done some work, extensive work, you might have even said, with Venus, the Witch Queen. And I'm a priestess of Inanna for 10 years now. And she's kind of led me on a journey throughout the world of like recognizing and understanding the ancient worship of aspects of her. And somehow, this is what I love about the spiritual path, there's always something new to learn. Somehow I've never come across this archetype or this aspect of Venus. If you could, share with us a bit about that.
I think it has to do with the medieval concept of the witch's Sabbath. And a lot of these locations that were connected to the witch's Sabbath were also connected to the goddess Venus. So you've got the Venusberg Mountain, the Brocken Hill, which is where the witches were said to hold their Sabbaths. So I kind of consider Venus to be a very, I guess, dualistic goddess. So we've got like the sort of the mainstream concepts of what it is to be a feminine deity, being associated with love and beauty and abundance and fertility. But they also often have this very ferocious, sort of like monstrous side to it. And we see it in the goddess Venus, being very jealous in a lot of cases and punishing people, causing all sorts of, chaos, and almost like a parallel to the goddess Eris or Discordia, very jealous.
It's almost like they have a shadow side.
Yeah, definite shadow side. Oh, you see it in the goddess Freya in Norse cosmology, where, not only is she associated with love and fertility and sex, but she's also a fierce battle goddess, chooses half of the slain warriors to join her in Folkvangir and await the end of the world. So she's like building this army, so they also show these very fierce qualities, which I think is important to kind of recognize that when it comes to talking about feminine energies. So goddess Venus, when it comes to green witchcraft and plant magic, she is kind of associated with the abundance of the earth in general. So thereby, connected to all sorts of plant work. But we also have like that poison path aspect where she is connected to the more baneful herbs as well. So they used to have gardens of Venus, which were gardens that were, full of different aphrodisiac and intoxicating herbs. But I also think that she has a connection to the garden of Hecate, which is where all of the poisonous plants grow as well. And I think that it's something that really kind of manifests in the plants of the poison path, specifically members of the nightshade family. We often talk about their medicinal properties as far as like pain relief, muscle relaxation, their potential for poisoning and being deadly. But then they're also, very popularly used as aphrodisiacs and in love magic. So we have the datura or toloache in Mexico that is used in all sorts of different forms of love magic, from the benign to the manipulative. Then we've got henbane, another member of the nightshade family, which is known for its aphrodisiac properties. It's still used even in Europe today in mildly psychoactive aphrodisiac massage oils. It was burned in bathhouses to basically make people horny and, lower their inhibitions so they could have a good time. Same thing with deadly nightshade. Used in beautification, said to dilate people's pupils to make them look more appealing. And so there's kind of like this element of, glamour and seduction and what we would consider very like feminine Venusian side to a lot of these, dark and poisonous plants. And I think that that's where kind of the role and idea of the witch queen comes into, and sort of embodying both of these aspects.
Oh, I love it. And it's so true. Like, I think what I've had to come to terms with, like, it's been really good getting questions from people about Dark Goddess, because you forget sometimes. You've been on the path a while, you sometimes forget like what those beginner questions are. And one of the big questions I get again and again is like, I want to live a joyful life. Why would I work with a dark goddess? I don't like that she's calling me, because that means my life is going to get harder. And it's just never true. Like, the more we work with our shadow, the more comfortable we get with who that shadow version of ourselves are, the more we get to be joyful, because there's nothing holding us back. Like we've all done that thing where we're procrastinating on something we know we have to do. Maybe it's sending an email, maybe it's calling that person, whatever it is. And you know that if you just go about your day and you're like, oh, it's a great day, I'm going to go get Dunkin', get my coffee, you're going to be in the back of your mind just, oh man, I really need to do that thing. I really need to do that thing. Whereas if you had just done the thing first, how much more would you enjoy that Dunkin' run or that hike or all the things that you want to treat yourself for become so much more enjoyable because of this darker side. And I think one of the darker sides of our shadow that gets kind of, it's been so demonized. Like, even the fact that we call Venus a dark goddess, like, it's why dark? Why was that the word they used? It's, first of all, it's colonization, it's otherization. Second of all, it's patriarchal. It's saying other. It's pushing them into the wrong half of things, because that's what patriarchy likes to do. It likes to dichotomize. And part of that quote unquote darkness they want us to dichotomize and always want to avoid is the seductive. It is that ability to know the power you hold as a woman or as somebody who's embodying seduction, because you can be any gender and do that. I think it's been demonized against women for so long because it was easy. Men could do whatever they wanted to women and say, oh, but she was pretty. That's not me. That's not on me. That's on her. Look how pretty she is. And one of the things that I think I'm most grateful for learning through my work with the dark goddesses is that we always are walking that thin sword that poison represents so beautifully of, do we want to be destructive? Do we want to create? Do we want to be manipulative? Do we want to be gentle and forthcoming and authentic? And in a way, we can't know what that authenticity is if we've never experienced what that manipulation is. Even if it's, maybe we don't have to go through the manipulation phase, but being able to recognize ways we've been manipulated or manipulation has played a part in our path, it gives us that grounding and that frame of reference to then say, no, I'm going to take my power back, and actually being seductive, being sensual, which is not the same as sexual, by the way, everybody. Knowing your power and your beauty is a choice. It's something we can decide to tap into. And I love that poison is actually, it's so tied up in that path.
Yeah, I think it teaches and expresses sort of the power that can be found in the shadow, or in this concept of darkness. And if we think of like all of these feminine deities that are considered dark goddesses, and, not only deities, but different apocryphal figures, other spirits in mythology. We've got like Lilith, Medusa, Hecate, Kali. These are all feminine presenting figures that embody empowerment, that embody ferocity, that have this independence, that are, not submissive, that stand in their own power. And for that, they are put into this category of dark goddesses that then we're taught to be afraid of. We're taught to be afraid of stepping into that power and, taking things into our own hands. And just like the spirit or demon or deity Lilith, not submitting to Adam. She was Adam's first wife and everything was supposed to go great. And then she was like, no, I'd rather do it this way. And then, that whole storyline and demonization of that kind of came out of her, just speaking her mind and trying to live her truth. And so I think that we associate those qualities with being negative or being corruptive, and wanting to keep people submissive and going with the status quo, and not disrupting society, not disrupting the patriarchal constructs that keep us kind of locked in these different gender roles. And that's where even like queer identity is so important, and playing with these different ideas of masculinity and femininity is really like stepping into that power. And I think that we should associate that ability to walk in the shadow as something that is empowering and something that we should be proud of and honored to do, and not something that's going to cause us to be punished or to make our lives more difficult. That's very much like stepping into kind of an Abrahamic, transgressive sin equals punishment kind of a narrative, which is what we're trying to get out of.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, yes. Literally, like I can't even with sin. It doesn't exist, people. Sin is made up. It's straight up not real. People are always like, oh, but no. Really sit with that. That's to listeners, like that's my encouragement.
Sit with that.
Meditate on that. Journal on that. Really look for anything you could actually classify as an objective sin, because I guarantee you won't find it. It just doesn't exist. Even things that you're like, oh, murdering someone's wrong, or there's things that you can be morally opposed to, but there is no all out and out sin, like it just does not exist.
And you quote in your book about darkness. And I love this quote because it's such a powerful message. Darkness is not the absence of light. It is the medium in which light exists. And that is so powerful, especially when people are thinking of this whole sin idea, this whole darkness, this descent. Yeah, it is. That's powerful because without darkness, light has no matrix to graft itself to. Before illumination, darkness holds infinite potential. Darkness is that void. It's that creative construct that we can pull from and create. And I appreciate you putting that in there, because it's a reminder that darkness is not the end. It is not the obliteration of light. Light cannot exist without the darkness. And so we have to take that into account when we're working with ourselves, when we're working with plants, when we're working with people, when we're going about our days in the world. Like there's always darkness, but where is the opportunity there? Where is that opportunity for growth, for compassion, for deeper insight? Yeah.
For some, literally, as you guys were like, as y'all were talking, a vulture just came, sat here, which we have vultures in the trees behind this house. So it's not like the craziest thing, but it is crazy that it sat
they come that close
right in the window and tapped on the glass.
Oh my gosh. Woo-hoo.
And I brought a feather from one of these guys. I'm going to say it's him, maybe one of his friends probably, but I did bring a feather with me on the trip I just came back from and like connected with vulture pretty deep. So that was pretty nice. That was
really cool. And in my tradition, we teach that vulture is the one that teaches us to digest. It teaches us to take in the toxin and transmute it into something valuable, something that we can grow from. So, because what does the vulture do? That takes the dead thing, it eats it, it takes in the bacteria that our physiology could not handle, and it transmute it into growing feathers, growing their babies, growing themselves, regeneration and nutrients. So yeah, that's a cool message.
I see vulture as like one of my favorite spirit teachers because they are one of the very, 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 very few animals that are carbon positive. They do more for the environment by being alive. Like that just, to me, they're gods on wings. I mean, I really, really, really love them. So that was really special. They gave us a little, hello, I see you. I like what you're saying here. And the last thought on the dark goddesses bit of like, the shadow. And there is a reason that all these dark goddesses are creatrixes. They're the ones who created life. And they're the ones who are creating from where? The womb or the dark. And that is where we have to go if we want to be creatrixes too, if we want to regain that inspiration that we feel we've lost. Okay, I have one last question and then I promise we're going to let you go. You have really cool flying ointment recipes in here. Like anybody interested in flying ointment, even if you're like, oh, I'm scared to make it, but like, what is it? This is actually, I'm going to say it's the best resource I've found on flying ointments. The most practical one and the most in-depth. Could you tell our audience, you don't have to give it all away because I want them to get this book, but tell them some of these improvement techniques, like why you think flying ointments might not work as well today as they did in the past. Because that was like, I almost like broke my technology break to call Leandra about this.
Yeah, that's kind of something that's been an ongoing investigation and experimentation. And I think that the medieval flying ointment recipes sort of leave some important details out, or just sort of assume that we know how to do this already.
Right.
But through like the rules and practices of modern herbalism, modern salve making, I think a little bit of that has kind of been lost in translation. So I think that one big difference in the efficacy of medieval flying ointments had to do with the carrier oil, or the fat that the plant material was being infused into. So typically we see it being in medieval recipes, some kind of pork lard or animal fat, which when applied topically is going to be absorbed much more effectively than something that is vegetable-based or wax-based. And if we kind of look at, modern herbal formulas, a lot of those salves are things that are meant to kind of sit on the skin and treat things superficially. They're not necessarily meant to be absorbed extremely deeply. So they'll be for things like muscle pain or different skin conditions, or healing like scrapes and bruises and things that exist on the outer layer already. So when we're talking about absorption and penetration, those animal fats, those lipids are able to get into our skin much easier. I also think, and something that is sort of left out in the wording, but it also depends on how you read some of the medieval recipes, is that in modern Western herbalism, we're typically making infused oils using dry plant material and kind of shy away from using fresh plant material because of the concern for contamination and shelf life. But I think when it comes to especially plants in the nightshade family, fresh plant material is going to be a little bit different chemically than dry plant material. And then knowing that the alkaloids, the active constituents in the plants of the nightshade family, are more water soluble than they are oil soluble. Having that existing water content present in the fresh plant material when we make our infused oils or infuse the fresh plant material into pork lard, we're kind of getting that ability of the water to help transfer and extract the active constituents into the carrier a lot more effectively than it would be if it was dry plant material.
Brilliant. Like, this is sort of like off, but kind of on the topic. Pseudo archaeology, quote unquote, is like the idea that we should actually consult modern day experts in order to excavate, history. Like, for example, if we were excavating a potter's shop, we would call in a ceramics artist today to like see what that thing might be used for. And it's called pseudo archaeology, interestingly, because mainstream archaeologists, it's quite a white man's club of privilege and money, they refuse to consult tradespeople. They refuse to see that they would have knowledge of value. And this just makes me think, like, if someone was able to get you in the archaeology department of a medieval, dig, what would we have learned more? Like, I'm sure witches tend to have this experience when we watch like historical only documentaries about archaeology. It's always like so limiting. It's like these two women were best friends, or, it's like there's always something wrong. Like they don't see queer people. They don't see women as empowering. They don't believe the religion was real, so they won't consider it.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating to me that we can be learning so much more about our ancestors in just, when you describe it, it's like, oh, duh. But you'd have to be a practitioner to figure those things out. And yeah, I'm just really grateful that you put that in the Poison Path Grimoire for people to read. Because I've never felt like making flying ointment, because everyone I've talked to was like, it doesn't really work. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to make it. Actually, I was going to talk to Leandra about that. Like, I was like, I want to get together this weekend and get some lard and make this ourselves.
Well, and we also have to remember that a lot of these practices were handed down from like master to apprentice. So there would be nuances that wouldn't be written down. They would just be verbally expressed. True. And
so true.
Maybe when they were writing it down, they didn't remember, or they just wanted to admit that so that they didn't have their proprietary knowledge out there in the world. And it's quite possible. But yeah, I like that idea of this archaeology. Like, what else could we learn from people who are doing the practice?
What else?
Yeah.
Yeah. So frustrating. Yeah. If anyone's like curious about that rabbit hole, I dive into it a lot more on the Seeking Numina with Elise Wells solo podcast I run. And my favorite pseudo-archaeologist, he's not a perfect man, but his work is pretty good, is Graham Hancock. So Google in if you're interested, because it is really fascinating stuff.
Gosh, this has been a great conversation.
I know. I'm like,
like, there's so many more things I want to talk about, but we could be here for like 4 hours, and I don't want to do that to you.
Yeah. I guess the last thing I just have to say is something else that I think people will be really refreshed to read about is the vulnerability of the tales you tell. Like you give us some direct rituals, direct quotes, experiences, names changed for respect, but otherwise these are like verbatim experiences that you've had. And that's so valuable for people. And I just wanted to thank you for being vulnerable enough to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to put these in there, because that's a hard choice to make as an author.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm honored to. And, I want to give people things that they can actually work with, and, not just speaking about things enigmatically or, in a way that is mysterious and enticing and sells a lot of books, but like very real, like it's a thing. It's just a thing. So
It's finally time. My book, Sacred Wild, An Invitation to Connect with Spirits of the Land, is now available for pre-order. Pre-orders are the #1 key to a book success. They help Sacred Wild reach more readers and even bestsellers lists. If you love the Magick Kitchen podcast, this is a great way to support my work. Pre-order now at seekingnumina.com/preorder. Thank you so much for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. And tell everybody where they can find you. Any festivals or anything that you're doing, or conferences, or where are you showing up for us?
Well, I will be at Convocation in Michigan at the end of February, presenting there. And then I'll also be at Sacred Space Conference in Maryland towards the end of March. You'll see me there?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I'm going to be there too, which is crazy because I'm never in the US at that time of year.
I'll actually be doing my flying ointment presentation, Curing the Dead Sleeps, which is kind of like a deep dive into, picking apart the medieval recipes and looking at like the differences and also, some of the non-poisonous and non-psychoactive ingredients that show up in the recipes and what they have in common and the role that they may have played. So that's a really cool one.
Okay, cool. Well, my talk is on the sacred ash. So creating like sacred fires and using sacred ash in different ways. So they kind of, I don't know, they might overlap a little bit in topic.
Well, I think that they do, because the ash is actually an ingredient in the ointment that can help with the absorption. So there's a whole lot of potential there when we talk about like ashes of specific trees. And
I literally, all the incense. So I use Dittany of Crete as like my main communal like herb for this 3-day descent I just did. And I kept all the burnt ashes of it, quote unquote, for no reason. Like my guides were like, don't forget the ashes. And I brought them home and I actually put them in the freezer because they stink. And I was like, that'll probably be the best place to keep them until I know what I'm supposed to do with them.
Yeah.
Sounds like I'm going to know what to do with them now.
You will. Yeah, I have,
cool.
I don't know if you can see it. There's a little tiny green bowl in the back there. That's where all my ash ends up. That's my ash bowl. So I'm excited for this. Yeah, we'll see you in March there. Where are you?
We got to get lunch or something.
Yeah, we will.
Awesome. The date. You can also follow my work online at thepoisonersapothecary.com. I'm also on social media at Poisoners Apothecary. And I do have a Patreon that's focused on the Poison Path, patreon.com/Poisoners Apothecary.
Awesome. Exciting.
Thank you so much for being here. This was so good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, keep us posted on all future books because we will have you back.
Yes.
I want to read them.
Absolutely. The third one that I'm just finishing the first manuscript for, so it'll probably be like a year or so before that's actually out, is the third, or I don't want to say final, but the third in the Poison Path series. So it's the Poison Path Oracle, divination, spirit communication, and trance work. So it's all fun.
Oh, that's so good.
I'm excited for it already.
So excited. Yeah. If you need endorsements or like, let us know.
Yeah, we're here.
So here.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Merry meet.
Merry part. And merry meet again.
Thank you for joining us on the Magick Kitchen Podcast. Please visit my website, leandrawitchwood.com, for news, information, and more episodes.
I'm Elise Wells, and I can be found at Seeking Numina on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and seekingnumina.com. That's Seeking, Numina.